A millionaire CEO returned home after an endless business trip, eager to surprise his little girl after months away. But what awaited him was a scene that crushed his heart. His daughter, who lived with a special condition, was sitting on the ground, picking up discarded crumbs. The real emotional blow came when he discovered the truth behind it all. So settle in and listen to this story. I hope it inspires you, touches your soul, and reminds you to value compassion just a little more. Maybe it'll even help you sleep more peacefully tonight. Let's begin. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. It was a bright April morning in New York City. Sunlight glinted off the glass towers as a sleek black luxury car cruised down Fifth Avenue, merging onto the highway heading north. Inside, Alexander Sterling leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on an old photograph. In it, little Sophia smiled, her white dress flowing beneath a giant sunflower. That small face squeezed his chest tight. From the driver's seat, Richard, his assistant, young, quiet, but observant, glanced at him through the rearview mirror and asked gently, "Sir, do we stop at the Westchester office first? Or go straight to Pine Valley Estates?" Alexander lowered the photo to his lap without taking his eyes off the window. "Home," he said simply. His tone was calm but heavy, like a tide holding something very deep. Richard nodded without another word. After 3 years working for Alexander, he'd learned the man wasn't one for many words. Since the passing of his wife, Alexander had thrown himself into work, turning his company into a global tech empire. People called him the cold visionary. But Richard knew the truth. Behind that gaze was a father who once knelt beside a crib, humming songs while a tiny hand grabbed the collar of his shirt. Alexander unlocked his phone. A message from Victoria appeared. "When are you getting home?" "I'll prepare dinner." He stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked it again without replying. He wanted to knock on the door himself, see the surprise on his wife's face and the joy in Sophia's eyes as she ran to hug him. That image had sustained him through endless work nights and made him smile. Richard spoke again, trying to break the silence. "I heard the old neighborhood's been quiet lately. People are going to be surprised to see you back." Alexander nodded slightly. 3 years is a long time. "I just want to see how the house looks now." Traffic lightened as they left the city behind. Rolling hills rose ahead, patches of green forest gleaming under the sun. When the sign for Pine Valley Estates appeared, 3 miles, Alexander exhaled deeply, his fingers drumming softly against the leather briefcase beside him. What do you think Alexander is feeling right now? Have you ever returned home after a long time away? Share your experience in the comments below. A memory surfaced. The morning he left home, Sophia stood by the window, one hand holding a crayon, waving goodbye while Victoria stood behind her with a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. That image had given him the strength to leave. When the car turned into the gated community, Alexander frowned. The iron gate was still there, but the entrance was littered with dry leaves. The house that once glowed with light and laughter stood eerily still. The sunflower garden was withered, the soil cracked and pale. "Maybe they went out somewhere," Richard suggested, stopping the car. Alexander stepped out. The early spring air carried a slight chill. He adjusted his collar and said, "Wait here. I'll walk in." Richard wanted to say something but held back, watching as Alexander, tall, composed, carrying only a single briefcase, walked slowly toward the gate. Alexander entered the code. The lock clicked, and the gate creaked open. He paused, taking in the sight. Overgrown grass, broken planters, peeling paint on the walls. Everything looked forgotten. From the backyard came the sound of music, not the smooth jazz he remembered, but something loud and chaotic. Sharp, carefree laughter floated through the air. Women's voices. He gripped the briefcase handle tighter and moved forward. Through the fogged living room window, he could see the mess. Bottles scattered, glasses tipped over, colorful jackets thrown across the couch. No sign of Victoria. No sign of Sophia. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over Victoria's name. when a strange noise slipped through the commotion, a faint metallic clinking followed by shallow, uneven breathing. If you were Alexander right now, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately or investigate further? Let me know your thoughts. He went rigid, staring toward the far end of the street. Sir, Richard called from behind. Is something wrong? Alexander raised a hand for silence. He listened. The sound came again, a soft exhale mixed with the whisper of wind passing by trash cans along the sidewalk. Leaving his briefcase by the gate, he began walking faster now. Each step felt heavier. The narrow street stretched ahead, lined with old stones and long tree shadows. The noise from the house faded. Only his footsteps remained. His heart raced. At the corner, beside a faded brick wall, a trash can lay tipped over. Next to it, something small moved. He stopped breathing for a moment. The figure was tiny, huddled, face hidden beneath a tangle of blonde hair. The child's thin arm reached toward breadcrumbs scattered on the ground. At first he didn't understand. His chest tightened as if someone had grabbed it. Then the child lifted her head slightly, but the sunlight was too bright to see her face clearly. Mr. Sterling. Richard called again, concern in his tone. Alexander didn't answer. He stood frozen, staring at the fragile form trembling before him. His mind flooded with memories, Sophia's laughter, her half-finished drawings, the way she used to call him Daddy. The metal lid clanged again. The small figure flinched, crouching lower. Alexander took a breath and stepped closer. Just a few feet away, he leaned down, his hand reaching out unconsciously. Sunlight caught the child's hair. It shone golden, painfully familiar. His heart twisted sharply. Then he saw it. The little hand lifted, startled, but there was only one. The other arm was missing. Alexander stepped back half a pace, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. Time froze. Everything around him blurred except that fragile, broken child sitting beside the trash. The distant music still echoed faintly on the wind. He crouched slowly, moving closer, eyes fixed on her. A breeze lifted her hair, revealing part of her face-paled cheeks, skin smudged with dirt, and eyes that met his with a dim, weary light. This is one of the hardest moments in any parent's life. Have you ever witnessed something that completely changed your perspective? Share your story below. Alexander took a few more steps. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears. The small figure by the trash can slowly came into focus. The child was crouched down, picking up crumbs scattered across the pavement. Her clothes were worn, the sleeves ragged, the gray fabric covered in dust. Every time she bent down, her thin shoulders trembled, struggling to keep balance with only one arm. Alexander froze. The disheveled blonde hair hid half her face. Sophia, the little braid in the back, the one he used to make every morning, was undone. That face, though thinner, paler, harder to recognize, was the same one he'd held countless nights. Sophia. She lifted a crumb to her mouth, blew softly on the dirt, then ate it with slow, cautious movements like a child afraid to waste even the smallest piece of food. The scene nearly brought Alexander to his knees. He stood motionless, breath shallow, one hand gripping the tree beside him to stay upright. Laughter echoed from behind the house. The door opened, and Victoria stepped out. Her bright red blouse caught the light, her heels clicking on the pavement, phone glowing in her hand. She walked with the confidence of someone heading to a party. Behind her came two of her close friends, Brenda and Louisa, known in the neighborhood for spending faster than they earned. Victoria's eyes scanned the yard until they landed on the tiny figure by the trash can. Her forehead creased. Brenda tugged at her sleeve, whispering something with a laugh. Louisa covered her nose as if the sight itself was offensive. Victoria signaled them to stay back, then walked toward the child, irritation in every step. Alexander hid behind the tree, unwilling to believe what was about to happen, but unable to look away. When Victoria stopped in front of Sophia, her voice rose sharp and loud enough for the whole street to hear. Sitting here again, making me look bad? How many times do I have to tell you? You want people to think we don't take care of you? Sophia flinched, clutching the piece of bread to her chest like protecting a treasure. She backed against the trash can, her foot slipping slightly on the pavement. Her lips moved, forming tiny trembling words Alexander couldn't hear. Victoria glanced at the small bowl of cold oatmeal nearby, the one Sophia had probably saved for later. With a kick of her heel, she knocked it over, spilling the cloudy liquid into the gutter. Sophia sobbed, eyes fixed on the ground. From a distance, Brenda let out a laugh. Louisa shook her head, murmuring loud enough for Alexander to hear. Poor thing. But still, what a sight! Alexander tilted his head up for a second, as if trying to hold himself together. When he looked down again, his eyes had darkened. His whole body was tense, every breath heavy as stone. Just then, some neighbors passed by. Mrs. Elena Mendez, the woman who once cared for Sophia, when she was in preschool, saw the child huddled by the can. She stopped instantly, clutching her purse. Victoria, what's going on? Why is the child like this out here? Mrs. Elena asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. Victoria didn't turn around. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and said coldly, She doesn't obey. She went out on her own. I can't watch her every second. Mrs. Elena froze, her eyes moving to Sophia. Brenda whispered something to Louisa. Both shook their heads and pulled out their phones, ready to take photos as if it were gossip material. Alexander couldn't take it anymore. That old buried feeling exploded in his chest, the same one he hadn't let himself feel for 3 years. The fear of losing his daughter mixed with guilt that cut him to the bone. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. He stepped out from behind the tree. The sound of his shoes hitting the pavement echoed sharply. Everyone turned at once. Sophia. Victoria went rigid. Mrs. Elena gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. Brenda and Louisa straightened immediately, their playful smiles wiped away. But Sophia, she looked up. Her eyes widened. Her pupils trembled. The piece of bread slipped from her fingers, falling silently to the ground. In that instant, Alexander forgot everything else. The world blurred. There were only his daughter's eyes, the same familiar gaze he used to see every night before telling her bedtime stories. Victoria took another step forward, not blinking. Sophia raised her remaining arm, stretching it into the air as if to make sure the man before her was real. Victoria glanced sideways, color draining from her face. She stood frozen, her eyelashes fluttering, hands clenching and releasing nervously. No one spoke. No one dared even to breathe. The whole street seemed to hold its breath. Sophia kept staring, her eyes glistening, about to overflow. And Alexander stood before his daughter, his hands slowly reaching toward her. Then a gust of wind swept through, pushing Sophia's hair aside, revealing her thin neck and the faint marks along it, signs of long neglect. Alexander's fists clenched. He leaned down, about to place a hand on her shoulder when Victoria suddenly stepped forward, blocking the space between father and daughter. Her face had gone pale, eyes wary, as if terrified the truth was about to be exposed. All eyes turned to Victoria. Behind her, Sophia stood still, her small feet backing up until they touched the trash can once more. What would you say to Victoria if you were there? How do you think Alexander should handle this moment? Your perspective matters. Share it below. Alexander froze for a moment, breath trapped in his chest. The sight of Victoria standing between him and Sophia broke something deep inside him, like glass shattering from the center. But over Victoria's shoulder, Sophia's frightened, tear-filled eyes met his, silently begging for help. Without thinking, Alexander moved around Victoria and knelt beside his daughter. Gently, he placed his hand on Sophia's shoulder. Come here, sweetheart. Come here. The child hesitated for one heartbeat, then threw herself into his arms with all the strength left in her small body. Sophia felt so light it made Alexander tremble. He held her tight, feeling every shallow breath, every trembling pulse like a fragile thread against his chest. "Alexander, you're home early," Victoria stammered. "I didn't know. This isn't what it looks like." She tried to smile, but her lips quivered, and the red lipstick smeared unevenly at the edge. "Alexander, Alexander." Alexander didn't look at her. He just held Sophia tighter, his hand sliding behind her back, feeling the worn fabric thin as paper of her shirt. So fragile it could tear with a single touch. Mrs. Elena stepped closer, breathing heavily as if she'd run a long way. She placed a gentle hand on Alexander's shoulder and whispered, her voice shaking. "You know now, don't you, Alexander? We've been worried for so long and didn't know how to help." Alexander looked up then. His eyes were red and moist. Richard rushed from the gate, freezing for a second in shock, then gripped his bag strap tightly, trying to control himself. Alexander stood, lifting Sophia in his arms as if she were made of glass. Without another glance at Victoria, he walked straight toward the house. Past the open glass door, the tangled curtains, and the blaring music echoing from a speaker hanging nearby. "Wait, Alexander, let me explain." Victoria stumbled after him. "I was just teaching her. She didn't want to study. I didn't mean to punish her too much, but she's so stubborn." Sophia flinched and buried her face deeper into Alexander's chest. "You'd better stop talking now," Alexander said quietly, his tone low but firm. Not another word. Behind them, Brenda and Louisa stood pale and motionless. The tension in the air was suffocating. Slowly, they backed away, then turned and hurried down the path, almost running. Mrs. Elena followed Alexander, speaking quickly. "Alexander, you have to know this. The neighbors, we've heard her crying at night. Over and over. Your windows are always closed. We never see her outside. Not once this whole winter." Alexander stopped in the middle of the yard. Each word fell like a stone, opening another door in his mind. The video calls Victoria always ended too soon. Sophia's short, forced responses before being told she was busy studying. The photos Victoria sent where the child was far away, her smile stiff and empty. He turned toward the house, his own house, and felt his stomach twist. "Has anyone ever hidden something important from you? How did you feel when you finally learned the truth? I'd love to hear your story in the comments." The place was a disaster. Dirty rugs, cluttered tables, empty wine glasses everywhere. No trace of family life. No trace of a child's laughter. Richard stepped closer in silence. "Mr. Sterling, I think we should call the police. Something's not right here." Alexander nodded quietly. Richard stepped aside, pulling out his phone. His voice was calm but urgent as he spoke with dispatch. Victoria stood near the withered flower bed, frozen. "Alexander, you're overreacting. I took care of her. She's just difficult sometimes." Alexander didn't answer. He carried Sophia to the porch and gently sat her down on a chair. The child clung to his shirt, her face pressed against his shoulder, silent but trembling. Every few seconds, she glanced at Victoria, terrified, as if she'd lived this scene too many times before. Alexander brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "It's okay now. I'm here." Mrs. Elena stood nearby, wringing her hands. "Alexander, we wanted to report this months ago. But Victoria said Sophia was receiving treatment at home. That her doctor wanted limited contact. We didn't know what to believe. But seeing this today, we can't stay silent anymore." Alexander nodded slowly. Each word felt like another weight pressing on his chest. Then a faint siren echoed from the street. A patrol car pulled into the driveway, stopping in front of the porch. Two officers stepped out, one young, one older. Their faces soft when they saw Sophia. "We got a call," the older officer said. "Who reported it?" Richard raised his hand. "I did. This is his daughter. We're afraid she's not safe." "Stop!" Victoria shouted. "You're making a mistake. I take care of her every day. She's just naughty sometimes." At that, Sophia gripped Alexander's hand tighter. Her body shook. Alexander covered the back of her head with his palm. The older officer looked from Victoria to the child, then crouched gently. Hello, princess. What's your name? Sophia hesitated, then whispered, I'm Sophia Sterling. Just hearing it made Alexander's knees buckle. He had to grab the chair to stay steady, his chest tightening as if something inside him had broken. The officer nodded solemnly. We'll document the scene and take her for a health check. Her safety comes first. Do you believe justice will be served? What do you think should happen to Victoria? Let me know your thoughts below. Alexander lifted Sophia into his arms again and walked toward the patrol car. The silence was heavy, broken only by shallow breaths and the faint hum of the engine. Victoria stood on the porch, pale, clutching her purse as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. When Alexander placed Sophia in the back seat, she leaned forward and gently tugged at his collar, clinging for a moment as if afraid he might disappear. I'm coming with you, Alexander said quietly but firmly. He walked to the other side, sat beside her, and was about to close the door when he glimpsed Victoria through the rearview mirror. She stood motionless on the steps. The fading sunlight stretched her shadow long across the porch. Her face was colorless, fear written in every line. Alexander looked for one last second, then closed the door and left. The click of the lock echoed sharp and final, the sound of an illusion ending. The patrol car pulled away slowly. Through the rear window, the White House receded quiet, silent, and empty. No longer the home it once pretended to be. Sunlight filtered through the trees, glinting off Sophia's golden hair as she rested her head on her father's shoulder. Eyes closed in exhaustion, Alexander placed his hand on her back firm and warm. Deep down, he made a promise he would never break again. From this moment on, his daughter would never have to face another ounce of pain alone. The patrol car escorted Alexander and Sophia out of the gated community, but Richard quickly suggested switching to their own car to get to the hospital faster. The officer agreed, and minutes later, Sophia was resting in Alexander's arms in the back seat of the sedan. Her breathing was faint, as if she were falling into a deep, exhausted sleep. Richard's hands gripped the steering wheel firmly. He didn't say anything. His eyes kept flickering to the rearview mirror, checking on Sophia, making sure she was still there. Still safe. Mrs. Elena sat beside Alexander, her trembling hand gently smoothing Sophia's tangled hair. That poor child has been through too much, she whispered, as if even saying it aloud might break her. Alexander leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. The warmth of her skin ached in his chest. Every time the car jolted, he instinctively pulled her closer, terrified that if he let go, she might slip away from him again, just like before. St. Mary's Medical Center sat at the end of a quiet suburban road. When they arrived, the nurse on duty instantly recognized Sophia's condition and rushed to bring out a stretcher. Alexander laid her down carefully, but her small hand clung to his sleeve. He leaned down and murmured, "I'm right here, sweetheart." Only then did she let go, her eyelids barely able to lift. Inside the emergency room, Dr. Anne Rivera appeared in the doorway, a sturdy woman with sharp but kind eyes. She recognized Alexander after a quick glance. "Mr. Sterling, please tell me what happened." Before Alexander could answer, nurses wheeled Sophia into the examination room. The door slammed shut, leaving him outside with a growing emptiness of worry pressing against his chest. "How is she?" he asked a nurse taking notes. The nurse glanced at the monitor and spoke softly. "Severe malnutrition. Muscle weakness. Dehydration. We're running additional tests." Alexander stepped back, leaning against the wall to steady himself. Mrs. Elena was beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm, trying to calm him without words. If you've ever waited for news about someone you love, you know how Alexander feels right now. Send him your strength in the comments below. Richard sat in the waiting area, phone in hand, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the closed door. A woman in a black coat approached and introduced herself as Mariana Gonzalez, a social worker. She explained that the hospital had reported the case to the department handling children in danger or neglect. She needed to gather information to ensure Sophia's protection. Mariana opened her notebook. I'll need the child's full name, legal guardian, home address, and current living situation. Alexander's voice came out rough but firm. Each word exhausted him. I'm her father. Alexander Sterling. Her name is Sophia Sterling. I live in New York City, and for the past 3 years, I believed I left her in the care of my second wife. Mariana listened carefully, her professional tone softened by the sadness in her eyes. We'll coordinate with the police. For now, the child will remain here under observation. All future steps will depend on medical and safety evaluations. Moments later, Richard stood and gestured to Alexander. He'd just received a call from the police station. They've detained Victoria for questioning. Mr. Sterling, they'll need your statement once things settle down here. Alexander nodded and turned his gaze toward the examination room door. When it finally opened, nurses wheeled Sophia into a small hospital room. She lay on crisp white sheets, an IV line in her arm, eyes closed but breathing more evenly now. Alexander walked to her bedside, pulling up a chair. He took her small, cold hand in his, holding it firmly. Mrs. Elena stood silently in the corner, her eyes glistening as she looked at the child she'd once cared for like her own granddaughter. Richard stayed near the wall, giving them space, a silent witness to the fragile peace in that room. Dr. Rivera returned after reviewing the first test results. Her voice was calm but firm. Her condition isn't life-threatening, but it's the result of long-term neglect. She needs time and proper nutrition to recover. I also recommend a psychological evaluation soon. Alexander responded with just 4 words, low but sure. I'll do whatever's necessary. Mariana stepped closer, her tone gentle. Mr. Sterling, for the investigation, you'll need to stay in the city for at least a week. Child protection will need to meet with both of you several times. However long it takes, Alexander said without hesitation. Night came slowly. The soft amber light of the hospital room fell on Sophia's delicate face, making her cheeks look even thinner. Alexander stayed by her side, never letting go of her hand. Mrs. Elena had gone home to rest, and Richard waited quietly in the hallway in case Alexander needed anything. Whenever Sophia stirred, Alexander leaned closer, whispering words she couldn't hear. His mind replayed the nights when she used to fall asleep on his shoulder, murmuring names of fairy tale characters he'd once read to her. The silence now felt heavier than anything he'd ever known. What would you say to Sophia if you could speak to her right now? Leave your message of hope in the comments. In the hallway, Mariana spoke softly with Dr. Rivera. Alexander caught fragments of their conversation. Interview. Victoria's testimony. Legal process. Each phrase fell like another weight pressing on his heart. Dr. Rivera looked through the window at Alexander and Sophia, then gave Mariana a small nod, as if they'd reached an understanding. Both walked away, leaving the hallway silent except for the steady hum of the IV monitor. Alexander adjusted the blanket over Sophia and sat back down. His hand lingered on her forehead, his breathing deep and unsteady, holding on to the last bit of calm he had left. But in that moment, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Only that he wouldn't let his daughter out of his sight again. Not for a single second. The next morning, before sunlight had fully spread across the streets, the city police station was already buzzing. Phones rang constantly, officers moved quickly across the tiled floor, and the air pulsed with the rhythm of routine tension. Inside Interrogation Room 2, Victoria was escorted in. She changed from her clothes the night before into a beige office dress, her blonde wavy hair neatly pulled back, light makeup carefully applied, deliberate, as if to prove she was organized, respectable. Sitting in the metal chair, she crossed her arms, trying to appear serene. Lieutenant Gomez, a tall man in his 40s with penetrating eyes, opened a notebook. Beside him sat Officer Flores, younger and cautious, setting up the recorder. "Shall we begin?" Gomez asked. Victoria straightened. "Of course. I'm cooperating fully. What happened yesterday was a misunderstanding. That child just likes attention. I was trying to teach her the right way, but..." Gomez scribbled a few lines, then continued. Please describe clearly how you've been caring for Sophia over the past 3 years. What do you think Victoria will say? Can people like her ever take real accountability? Share your thoughts below. A tight smile crossed Victoria's lips. I hired help, but she quit without notice. I had to do everything myself. Sophia can be difficult sometimes. I don't understand why people are distorting things. Flores looked from the report to her face. Neighbors said they rarely saw Sophia outside. Victoria waved dismissively. They're exaggerating. They've never liked me. The air in the room grew heavier. Victoria. Gomez leaned back, studying every flicker in her expression before speaking evenly. We need accurate information. Your statement doesn't match the doctor's report or witness accounts. Would you like to add anything before we file the record? Victoria pressed her lips together, her tone firm but forced. I just want to say I've been misunderstood. That's all. Meanwhile, in the reception area, Alexander entered with Mariana and Mrs. Elena. The scent of coffee mixed with paper and ink, the usual smell of a government office. Alexander carried a thick file under his arm. Mariana handed documents to the officer at the main desk. These are financial records from the past 3 years. Mr. Sterling sent regular support payments with no signs of financial difficulty. Alexander stood upright, voice low but firm. I never let them lack for anything. Mrs. Elena looked down, her aging eyes gleaming with a mix of sadness for Sophia and pity for a father blinded for too long. The three were then led to Officer Flores' office for additional statements. Mariana presented the medical findings. Sophia was malnourished, physically weakened, and showing signs of prolonged emotional distress. Flores' face hardened. He scribbled notes and asked Alexander about his time away from home. When we had video calls, she barely spoke, Alexander said, hands tightly gripped under the table. I thought she was shy. I believed Victoria when she said Sophia was being cared for. The door opened softly. Lieutenant Gomez entered, greeted Alexander, then addressed Mariana. We took Victoria's statement. There are several contradictions. At that moment, Victoria was escorted down the hallway. When she saw Alexander stand, her composure faltered. Her voice rose, unsteady. Alexander, please listen. I was under pressure. I lost my temper sometimes, but they're distorting everything. Alexander said nothing. His eyes were cold, exhausted, carrying more weight than any anger he could express. Victoria's breath caught. The officers guided everyone to the briefing room to finalize paperwork. Brenda and Louisa were absent. They'd left town early to avoid involvement. Mrs. Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I often heard the child crying at night. The windows were always closed. I called several times, but Victoria never let me in. Victoria shot her a sharp look. She's lying. She's always had something against me. Have you ever witnessed someone refuse to accept responsibility? How did it make you feel? Let me know in the comments. Lieutenant Gomez raised his hand to stop them. That's enough. Everything has been noted. Please sign the statement. Alexander signed first. When Victoria received the paper, her hands trembled. She scrawled her name quickly, then lifted her eyes to Alexander. You don't know everything, she murmured, loud enough for him to hear. Alexander frowned slightly but gave no response. He turned and walked out. Officer Flores then announced, during the investigation, Mrs. Victoria must remain in the city. She's not permitted to leave her registered address. Victoria clutched her purse, lips tight, eyes flickering between anger and fear. Mariana handed Alexander a sheet of temporary instructions. I recommend you and Sophia stay at a hotel or with someone you trust. The house is sealed for investigation. We'll move today, Alexander said. Outside, Richard was waiting near the car. He opened the door, helping Alexander settle Sophia still weak into the back seat. She rested her head against his shoulder as he buckled her seatbelt, her eyes quietly following his every movement. As the car pulled away from the station, Alexander looked out the window, watching the city blur without really seeing it. In the rearview mirror, Victoria stood on the pavement outside the station. She didn't wave or call out. Her hands gripped her purse so tight her knuckles turned white, her gaze fixed on the car vanishing into the distance. The confidence she once carried had completely disappeared. When they arrived at a small hotel near the hospital, Richard stepped out first and opened the door for Sophia. The child entered the lobby slowly, holding Alexander's hand tightly, her tired eyes showing a rare hint of security. The lobby lights gleamed against the polished floor. Outside the glass door, a security camera shifted slightly, capturing the moment father and daughter entered. Then it turned toward the sidewalk, where a figure stood behind a lamppost. Victoria watched them one last time, her eyes clouded and unreadable. Then she turned and walked quickly down the street, as if trying to escape the truth closing in on her. 2 days passed quietly inside the small hotel room. Every morning, Alexander drew the curtains just enough to let in a soft line of light, never too bright, afraid it might startle Sophia. What would you do if you were Alexander right now? How would you help Sophia heal? Your ideas matter, share them below. She was more alert now. Her eyes no longer had that distant fog from the first day. Still, she barely spoke, just nodded or shook her head. Alexander rearranged his entire routine around her. He rarely left the room for more than 10 minutes. Dr. Ann Rivera stopped by after her hospital rounds for Sophia's checkup. She set her bag on the table, opened her folder and said, "Alexander, physically she's stable for now," while gently checking Sophia's pulse. But her mind has been through too much. She needs help immediately. Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, one hand gripping the edge of the chair. "Tell me what she needs." "We need a child psychologist," Anne said, looking him directly in the eyes. "Someone who can help her feel safe again." That afternoon, Mariana arrived with a light blue folder in her hands. "I found someone who might be perfect," she said, sliding a photo toward him. "Dr. Lavra Bennett. She's specialized in working with children who've faced neglect or long-term trauma. She's exceptional patient, calm and firm." Alexander studied the photo. Lavra appeared to be Victoria's age, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that inspired trust easily. He agreed without hesitation. The first session was the next morning. Lavra sat in a low chair across from Sophia. No notebook, no pen, just her and Sophia. "Do you like cats?" she asked gently, as if starting an ordinary conversation. Sophia said nothing, clutching her pillow tightly. Lavra smiled and began talking about her own cat, how it once shredded her clothes, tried to nap inside the refrigerator, and always stole her toast. Each story carried a small, warm detail that even made Alexander, listening silently from the hallway, feel his chest lighten a bit. Then came the faintest whisper from inside the room. "I like cats too." Alexander leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For the first time in days, something inside him softened. It was as if a closed door inside Sophia's world had quietly opened. That night, Richard came with a thick stack of papers. He set them on the coffee table and opened the first page. "Mr. Sterling, I traced Victoria's recent transactions. She's been using your credit card for large, expensive purchases." Alexander flipped through the pages. Watches, jewelry, private club memberships, bar receipts. The numbers were printed in bold, almost mocking him. He froze at one invoice. "She spent my money like this while my daughter was suffering?" Richard didn't answer. His eyes drifted to Sophia, who was now quietly coloring with her new pencils. A few minutes later, Mariana arrived with another file. "The police found security footage from the storage house," she said. "There's also a financial record. Every cent you sent for household expenses was withdrawn. How does this make you feel? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Share your story below." Alexander leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't the money that broke him. It was the trust he'd given and how that trust had become his daughter's silent suffering. Lavra stepped out of the room, closing the door softly so Sophia wouldn't wake. "She needs to stay away from any reminders of that house," she said evenly. "If possible, move her to a quiet place. A new place. It will help her start over." Alexander nodded. I'll find a place tonight. By midnight, he'd rented a small apartment near the river. Quiet streets, few neighbors. The kind of place where you could actually hear the wind. Richard packed the hotel room, loaded the car, and handled everything else. When Alexander helped Sophia into the car, he leaned down and asked softly, "Do you want to pick out your own curtains?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded. It was the first time in years someone had asked her opinion. At the store, she reached out and touched a pale blue curtain and a blanket with little fish prints. Alexander bought both without a second thought. The new apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and windows overlooking the river. Richard hung the curtains while Sophia stood nearby, watching, her eyes returning to make sure Alexander hadn't gone anywhere. Once everything was set, she climbed into her new bed and fell asleep almost instantly, no trembling, no sudden jolts. Alexander sat by the window with a glass of water. The streetlights stretched long across the table. The folder from earlier lay open, Victoria Rameau's name printed at the top, followed by witness statements, photos of the sealed house, and frames from the footage police had recovered. He turned a page, lips pressed tight. Every detail hurt, but he couldn't stop reading. Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." Alexander shook his head. "I'll rest when Sophia truly feels safe. Not before." In the next room, Sophia turned in her sleep, breathing slow and steady. Alexander looked at the half-open door and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Across town, a dim bar hummed under yellow light. In the far corner, Victoria sat across from a stranger. Her face had lost its pride. Her eyes moved nervously. She whispered something and slid an envelope across the table. The man opened it. Inside were photos. Alexander and Sophia at the hotel, under flickering light. His hand tightened around the images. His lips drew into a hard line. His eyes darkened, unreadable, fixed on the smiling faces of father and daughter. Inside the dimly lit bar, Daniel Pierce turned the envelope in his hands. His eyes scanned the photos inside, Alexander carrying Sophia at a hotel, Sophia resting her head on her father's shoulder in the hospital room, and then the 2 of them leaving together. Calm but warm. Daniel tapped a finger along the edge of the photo, lost in calculation. Across from him, Victoria sat with fingers interlaced beneath the table. She leaned forward and whispered, "All I need is for you to make Alexander lose his composure, or bring me something that breaks his trust. You'll get much more than you think you're owed." Daniel leaned back and took a slow breath. "You're talking about a big payout. I just want to make sure you'll actually deliver." Victoria slid another thick envelope toward him. "Take this now. The rest once it's done." Daniel looked at it, weighing his options. He'd done plenty of work in the gray corners of business, risky short-term investments, debts gone bad, deals that never saw daylight. This was nothing new to him. Rising from his seat, he tucked the envelope into his coat pocket. "I'll figure out what matters most to Alexander Sterling." The next day, Daniel rented a small apartment in a residential block, across from Alexander's temporary place. From his window, he could see the main entrance clearly. A handheld camera, some newspapers, his old phone and laptop, that was all he needed. "Do you think Daniel will succeed? What would you do if someone was watching you? Let me know your thoughts." Surveillance began that morning. Daniel watched Alexander helping Sophia out of the car for her therapy session with Laura. The child held a small notebook, walking slowly but steadily. Before she entered, Alexander knelt to tie her shoelace. Daniel took photo after photo, his face expressionless, though his eyes narrowed slightly. He could see the closeness between father and daughter, something that didn't fit the picture Victoria had painted. Inside, Laura sat at a small table, guiding Sophia through writing practice. The little girl gripped the pen with her prosthetic hand, tilting her head as she concentrated. Each stroke wobbled a bit, but the letters stayed clear. She wrote her name, then the word "deity," still uneven but full of effort. Laura smiled and glanced at Alexander, who watched from the chair across. "That's real progress." She feels safer now. Sophia looked up briefly, then leaned back into her writing. Alexander nodded, his voice low and firm. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Lavra took notes in her file, advising Alexander to keep their bedtime talks, a simple ritual that helped build Sophia's trust. That afternoon, Mariana arrived with a folder thicker than before. The investigation's almost finished, she said, setting it on the couch. We have enough financial evidence and witness statements to take this to county court. Victoria will be officially charged. Alexander said nothing. He placed the file on the table, looking at the first page, Victoria Ramos in bold. Richard, still on his phone near the door, nodded. Your lawyer in New York is ready. Full custody paperwork will be finalized soon. For a few hours, peace returned. Sophia painted by the window, a watercolor of a fish swimming in blue water, with two hands held together, side by side. Alexander looked at the drawing, his heart softening. Meanwhile, Daniel sent a new batch of photos to Victoria. Alexander and Sophia shopping. Lavra walking the child. The two walking home hand in hand. Victoria's response came fast, just one short cutting line. Make Alexander lose control. You know what to do. Daniel read the text, let out a quiet sigh, but didn't stop. He needed the money. The next evening, near sunset, he decided to move. He put on a clean shirt, pinned on a fake press badge, smoothed his hair, and walked toward Alexander's building. After knocking 3 times, he smiled when Richard opened the door. Good evening. I'm a freelance journalist, Daniel said smoothly. We'd love to interview Mr. Sterling about his family's inspiring comeback story. Richard didn't move. He scanned Daniel from head to toe with sharp eyes. Do you have press credentials? Daniel fumbled in his wallet. Yeah, let me find. Richard watched his hands move, suspicion growing. If you don't have proper ID, I'll have to ask you to leave. Daniel froze for a beat, blinking the only sign of discomfort. Then he turned and left. What would you have done in Richard's position? Would you have trusted him? Share your answer below. Richard quickly closed the door, called Alexander, and told him everything. Alexander stood still, frowning. We need to call the police. Within 10 minutes, officers arrived. They reviewed hallway footage and took Richard's statement. But by the time they searched the neighborhood, Daniel was gone. Alexander leaned against the wall, fists clenching. Sophia was still in her room with Lavra, unaware of what was happening. But that old fear returned to his chest, the fear that Victoria wasn't finished, that she'd never stop interfering in their lives. Later that night, while Alexander was reading Sophia a bedtime story, she suddenly sat up and grabbed his arm. Daddy, someone's looking through the window. Alexander froze, heart pounding hard. Daddy! He rushed to the balcony, slammed the curtains shut, and turned on the lights. Outside, he only caught a shadow slipping away, disappearing down the alley between buildings. Alexander locked every latch. Richard arrived within minutes. Together they checked the balcony, nothing but wind brushing the railing. But when Alexander turned, something white caught his eye. A folded note pressed against the glass by the breeze. Richard picked it up. It was written in thick black marker, the letters jagged and rough. I know where you are. Richard handed it to Alexander without a word. Alexander stared at it, fingers tightening until the paper crumpled slightly. His breathing grew heavy. The quiet night no longer felt safe. The shadow had returned. Morning came slowly after a tense night, as if someone had stretched time. Richard opened the balcony door to check the lock again and discovered something caught by the wind in the gap between the door frame and the curtain. He crouched down to pick it up, a small piece of paper folded carelessly, with letters written in black marker. There were just a few short lines. Tonight. Come alone. Lakefront Restaurant, number 14, El Mirador. Richard entered the living room. Alexander was preparing a cup of warm milk for Sophia. His eyes still tired from the long night. Richard placed the piece of paper in his hand. Alexander read it and immediately understood this wasn't a harmless note. It was the continuation of last night's paper. And this time it was clearer with an address, a time, and an intention. Sophia was sitting on the couch, coloring a vibrant fish on a page. Alexander looked at her, then tucked the paper into his jacket pocket. He didn't want the little one to see anything that would worry her more. When Sophia went into the bathroom to brush her teeth, Alexander said quietly to Richard, "Call Mariana and alert the local police. I'll go at the exact time." Richard frowned but didn't protest. He knew Alexander had made a decision, and the most important thing was not to let him go alone literally. By evening, the weather was cool. The lake sat still like a mirror of darkness. El Mirador restaurant had only a few yellow lights scattered along the path, lights spilling onto the water. Alexander arrived a few minutes early, wearing a long coat, the car key gripped in his pocket, his eyes watching every dark corner around the parking lot. Police had already positioned themselves in the area behind the restaurant. Richard was also nearby, maintaining distance to avoid detection but close enough to intervene if necessary. "What do you think is about to happen? Would you have gone to this meeting? Share your prediction below." When Alexander entered, the small wind chime tinkled softly. The waiter looked at him and nodded, as if accustomed to silent customers at late hours. At the last table near the window overlooking the lake sat Victoria. She no longer wore elegant clothes like before, but a light-colored sweater. Her blonde wavy hair pulled back, makeup smudged, revealing deep dark circles. Across from her was Daniel, with a casual appearance but a slightly tense face like someone preparing for a decisive negotiation. Alexander walked directly toward them. When he pulled up a chair to sit, Victoria forced a smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander looked at Daniel. "I want to know the reason." Victoria sighed, her hands interlaced as if trying to appear fragile. I was misunderstood, Alexander. This all got out of control. Daniel is the one who managed the accounts. I just followed his instructions." Daniel let out a very slight laugh. "I managed? You're putting all the blame on me?" Victoria turned to Alexander so quickly it revealed her impatience. "Alexander, you know I'm not a bad person. I cared for Sophia in my own way. But everything got exaggerated. I just want to resolve this peacefully." Alexander remained silent. He didn't look at Victoria or react to her explanation. Daniel put a stack of printed papers on the table. "This is a copy of the agreement. If you want this matter to stop, I need an amount to cover loose ends." Alexander looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "You want money?" Daniel shrugged without denying it. "I'll cooperate," he said. "But I just need enough to stay quiet." Alexander leaned back in his chair. His eyes showed no anger or confusion in that moment, only exhaustion mixed with a bit of disgust that had built up too long. "Agreed," Alexander said calmly. "I'll give it to you." Victoria exhaled slightly, as if just released from a tight rope. Daniel reclined with hands interlaced behind his head. Alexander opened his jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope Richard had prepared. Inside was only blank paper. He placed it right in the center of the table. Daniel reached out to take the envelope, opening it while looking both ways. But just as the corner of the envelope separated, blue and red lights projected from the window. The sound of shoes echoed loudly on the wooden floor. Two officers entered. Flores at the front, Gomez behind. "We need to review documentation," Gomez said, loud enough for the room to fall into complete silence. Victoria jumped up. No, this is just a normal meeting," Flores gestured with his hand. "We have a subpoena for both of you to return to the station to continue the investigation." Daniel remained seated without struggling, but his eyes lost focus for a moment. Confidence faded. Victoria touched Daniel's shoulder, but Gomez immediately separated them. Both were escorted out of the restaurant. Do you think this is justice? Or is there more to come? Let me know what you think below. Through the window overlooking the dark lake, Alexander stood. He handed the fake envelope to Flores. "I'll sign the statement when needed." Richard appeared a few minutes later, walking beside Alexander. "Everything okay?" Alexander didn't answer, just nodded. His gaze followed the police car slowly pulling away from the parking lot. Near midnight, the apartment was quiet, with only the yellow light from the closet. Sophia was sitting on the couch, hugging her drawing notebook. When Alexander opened the door, she looked up, her eyes slightly red from exhaustion, but lighting up when she saw him. Alexander sat beside her, putting his hand on the child's back. Sophia opened the drawing notebook, showing him a newly finished page. It was a drawing of two people sitting by the seashore. Daddy, a large figure, the father holding the child's hand sitting beside him. In the lower corner of the drawing, Sophia wrote with shaky handwriting, "I trust you, Daddy." Alexander looked at the drawing for so long that Sophia had to touch his palm, as if afraid he didn't like it. "I love it," Alexander said, his voice low but firm. "Very much." The child rested her head on his shoulder. Alexander then embraced her. But in his heart, the weight remained clearer than ever. Tonight's encounter showed him that the wound from the past 3 years couldn't close in a week, and those who had dragged his family into the abyss were still looking for ways to interfere in their lives. He got up to turn off the light. The outside light from the window gently swept the wall. Police car lights patrolling had just passed. The investigation was expanding, and every link was becoming clear. On the road leaving the residential neighborhood, the police car carrying Daniel turned slowly at the intersection. Daniel rested his head against the car window, looking out silently but full of plans. No one knew what was forming in his head at that moment. At the city police station, morning passed under heavy air. Along the long hallway, only the sound of officers' footsteps and the soft whisper of papers broke the silence. Daniel and Victoria were escorted to separate interrogation rooms. The doors closed behind them with a sharp click, the sound marking the beginning of a new phase in the investigation. Lieutenant Gomez decided to start with Daniel. He sat in a metal chair, hands on the table, eyes wandering but tense as Gomez turned on the recorder. "Mr. Daniel Pierce," Gomez began. "You're detained under suspicion of extortion and possible involvement in other illegal activities. Would you like to make a statement before we begin?" Daniel exhaled slowly, as if he'd been preparing for this moment. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "Victoria hired me to follow Alexander Sterling. She wanted leverage information that could help her twist things. When I got caught, she panicked and tried to blame me. Have you ever seen someone turn on their partner to save themselves? What do you think of people like Daniel?" Comment below. Gomez took notes without saying a word. "Do you have evidence of that claim?" Daniel nodded, leaning slightly forward. "Text messages, bank transfers. I can show you everything. I just want some leniency." Gomez looked into his eyes. He didn't show belief immediately but knew when someone was trying to treat for a way out. "We'll verify it. Keep talking." Daniel continued, describing how Victoria had asked him to follow Alexander, money channeled through intermediaries and the secret calls they'd made. His voice was calm, not repentant, more like someone negotiating their own safety than confessing guilt. Gomez listened carefully, maintaining distance. After nearly an hour, Gomez stopped the recording and stood. "We'll review your statement, but everything will have to be confirmed." Daniel leaned back in his chair, silent. In the next room, Victoria sat motionless, fingers interlaced tightly in her lap until they turned pale. Unlike Daniel, she didn't say a word during the first 10 minutes. Officer Flores tried some gentle questions, but Victoria only responded, "I want to speak with my lawyer." A public defender arrived shortly after, a middle-aged woman in a gray suit. She opened her folder, quietly explaining Victoria's rights and obligations. After a brief discussion, the lawyer stepped out and told Officer Flores, "My client is willing to cooperate, but needs protection from Daniel Pierce." Flores noted it and relayed the message to Gomez. Police decided to split the case into 2 parts: the extortion case, involving Daniel and Victoria, and Sophia's abuse case focusing solely on Victoria. Gomez instructed his assistant to finalize the report for submission to the state court. Sheets of paper slid constantly through the printer, the rhythmic sound filling the administrative office. Across town, in an apartment by the river, Mariana was on the phone with Alexander. When he answered, his voice was calm and deliberate. "Good news. Both have started talking. The investigation is moving forward." Alexander leaned on the window frame, watching the sparse traffic below. "I understand. Thank you." He hung up, sat down, and rubbed his temples. Relief came slowly, mixed with something bitter like joy that had to pass through regret before it could breathe. In the next room, Sophia was drawing with Lavra. She held the pencil with her prosthetic hand, her lines firmer than the week before. The drawing showed a small house by the sea, an open window, and a wide, calm horizon. Seeing her father through the glass door, Sophia dropped the pencil and ran to him. "Daddy, look at my drawing." Alexander knelt and took the paper. The simple little house as it was radiated peace. "It's beautiful," he said softly. He pinned the drawing to the living room wall, right above the bookshelf. "What does this drawing mean to you?" "What do you think Sophia is trying to say?" "Share your interpretation." Alexander stood there for a good while, as if making sure this was the beginning of a new home within Sophia's heart, one untouched by the past. That night, Richard received a call from the police. He stepped into the hallway to listen clearly. His expression tensed, then became thoughtful. When he returned to the living room, he put the phone on the table. "There's been a new development." Daniel agreed to testify about the money laundering network Victoria was involved in. "That could help you recover what was taken from you." Alexander didn't lift his head. "What do they need from me?" "Mariana wants you to go to the station tomorrow morning to sign a supplementary affidavit and confirm some financial details." Alexander took a slow breath. "Agreed." Back at the detention center, Victoria was escorted to the infirmary for a psychological evaluation. Her face looked pale, drained of her usual sharpness under the harsh white light. She looked at the file in her hands, eyes blinking. "You requested to see Dr. Lavra Bennett?" The nurse confirmed. Victoria nodded weakly. Lavra arrived later that night, still in her simple clothes after therapy hours. She closed the door quietly behind her and set her bag on the table. The small room was so quiet both could hear the wall clock ticking. Victoria sat on the edge of the examination bed, gripping the file, her expression heavy and worn. As Lavra approached, Victoria finally looked up. Their eyes met in a long, charged silence. Lavra didn't know what Victoria was about to say. Victoria didn't know how much longer she'd have the chance to speak at all. And in that suspended moment, the small room felt as if it contained one last secret waiting to be revealed. The infirmary inside the detention center was quieter than usual that afternoon. Light filtered through the small window, shining on the gray tiles and metal table where Victoria sat, hands tightly interlaced in her lap. Lavra entered, put her bag on the chair, and nodded to the guard standing just outside. The door was left slightly open, standard procedure, private enough for conversation but never completely closed. Victoria looked up. The defiance in her eyes had disappeared, replaced by exhaustion and confusion. "I want to tell everything," she began, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "But I don't want to see Alexander. I can't handle the way he looks at me." Lavra took a seat across from her without lifting her pen yet. "You can start however you want. I'm here to listen." Victoria slid her thumb along the edge of the file in front of her. "I grew up poor, but always chasing what others had. When I met Alexander, I thought it was my chance to change everything. He was kind, patient, decent. I really believed if I tried hard enough, I could become someone worthy. But..." She paused, swallowing with difficulty. "But then Sophia, she made me realize I could never do it. She gave him a type of joy I could never touch. Every time he called home, one smile from her changed his entire voice. I knew it was jealousy, but I couldn't stop." Lavra remained silent, hands folded neatly on her knees, firm, comforting. "At first, I just wanted to keep her at bay. But the more I tried, the more terrified I became. Terrified that Alexander would see who I really was. That he'd discover I didn't know how to care for Sophia the way she deserved. That he'd realize I didn't love her. How do you feel hearing Victoria's confession? Does it change how you see her? Let me know in the comments. Her words weakened, trembling. I knew it was wrong, Lavra. I always knew. There were nights I thought about calling him, telling him I couldn't do it anymore. But I was too afraid. So I covered it up. And over time I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Lavra tilted her head slightly. Do you regret it? Victoria exhaled slowly, eyes empty. Every day. But regret doesn't fix anything. Her hands trembled as she placed the file on the table. Please tell Alexander I'm sorry. And Sophia too, if she still remembers me. Lavra carefully noted every detail, then stood. Victoria looked up one more time. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want them to live in peace. Lavra didn't respond with words, just a slow nod, enough for Victoria to understand her message would be delivered. The door closed softly behind her. The guard escorted Lavra down the brightly lit hallway. Inside, Victoria remained seated, covering half her face with her hand, a woman who had finally stopped hiding from her own truth. Outside in the parking lot, Lavra saw Mariana waiting. She handed her written summary. Mariana scanned it quickly and nodded when she saw the confession matched the financial evidence from the mansion. This will make things much clearer in court, Mariana said. Lavra didn't respond immediately. Her eyes drifted toward the heavy metal doors behind her. Thinking of the fragile, broken woman inside, flawed, yes, but finally honest. The trial was scheduled for 3 weeks later. One morning, Alexander received the court summons, white paper, red seal, delivered by Richard while Sophia sat nearby painting. Alexander read it without surprise. It felt less like news, more like an ending slowly approaching. While Mariana explained the court process, Sophia sat at her small table, applying watercolor to a drawing of the ocean, a calm sea, a small house, 2 figures standing near each other. You'll stay with Lavra while I go take care of things, okay? Alexander said gently. Sophia nodded, still looking at her painting. She understood in the quiet way a child who's seen too much already does. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking at the quiet street below. The yellow glow of streetlights stretched across the pavement like pieces of memory being pulled from darkness. He thought about the trips that kept him away for months, the forced smiles he'd seen on video calls, the way he'd believed Victoria without questioning. And finally, he realized what truly remained in his life wasn't wealth or success, but the little girl sleeping in the next room and the duty he'd once let slip away. What would you say to Alexander if you could speak to him right now? Leave your message of encouragement below. The morning of the trial, Alexander took Sophia's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing. Richard followed closely to prevent anyone from getting too close. Sophia gripped her father's hand tighter, not afraid, just calm, hiding slightly behind him as they passed through the crowd. Inside, Victoria was led through a side door. When she saw Alexander and Sophia, her head bowed. Her blonde hair was pulled back, her face pale. Her figure small and fragile. When Alexander took the stand, he spoke only a few words, just the truth of the past 3 years. What he'd witnessed that day by the trash can, and his hope for peace for his daughter. No harsh accusations, no bitter tone. Just calm, deliberate honesty. It was enough to make Victoria lower her head even more, eyes closed tightly under the weight of shame. Daniel testified next, cooperating fully to reduce his own sentence. Finally, the judge read the verdict. Victoria would serve a long sentence, while Daniel received a lighter one in exchange for helping investigate the money laundering network. The sound of the gavel echoed in the courtroom, a sharp final note closing a long, painful chapter. Exiting the courthouse, Alexander knelt beside Sophia. She slipped her small hand back into his. Together they descended the marble stairs, sunlight pouring over them, stretching their shadows far behind. In that light, everything felt clearer. The road ahead still uncertain, but no longer darkened by what had been. Across the plaza, Lavra stood by the railing, watching them. When Alexander looked her way, she nodded gently, A quiet gesture of congratulation and a promise that the path to healing had finally begun. And that was tonight's story. A long journey of pain and hope, where a father's love and a child's quiet strength guided us through the darkest corners toward the light that remains. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which character moved you most? Was it Alexander, steady and patient, learning to face his own mistakes? Sophia, brave enough to keep believing in love after everything she'd endured? Or Laura, whose quiet persistence helped open the path to healing? What moment stayed with you the longest? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. Every perspective makes this story a little more complete, and I can't wait to hear yours. Thank you for being here tonight. May this story remind you to hold your loved ones a little closer, to choose compassion over judgment, and to never give up on those who need you most. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.